Hello and welcome back to Crafty Not Shifty. Today I am sharing with you my 10 cards made using the Heffy Doodle Wingman card kit. I've been really excited to share this with you and apologies that it has taken me so long. So here is the Wingman stamp set, and I'm going to show you here just quickly how you use the stamps. You can pick them up with an acrylic block, tap on your favourite ink. This is a black ink that's suitable for alcohol marker colouring, and then just press that down and you have a perfectly stamped image. You'll see throughout this video that I switched to using my Misti stamping tool quite a lot, so I wanted to show that you can use these stamps with an acrylic block also. I did the majority of my colouring offline from this video, and I just wanted to take you through just one of these little parrots really quickly. You can see I'm just applying stripes of colour, going from red into an orangey yellow, and then blue, and then where the yellow and the blue meet, I'll get green. There's nothing fancy about this type of colouring, I'm certainly no colouring expert. I'm just laying down some colour and making sure that I like it. After all, this is a handmade card and it's not meant to be perfect. So I've cut the little guy out and now I'm going to use the coordinating die, and I'll hold that in place with my Heffy tape and then just run that through my die cut machine, and you'll see that that will pop out the stamped image perfectly. Okay, so now I'll move on to stamping my sentiment. For this card I wanted to repeat stamp the sentiment, and a stamping tool like this one is great for this. So I've lined the stamp up where I want it to be at the lowest point, and then I'll choose an ink and stamp that down. And I'm just inking that up with a mini ink cube and then pressing that down, and then I'm going to use the grid paper on my Misti, and I'm just going to move it down one notch on the grid paper and then repeat this using a different colour. I make sure to clean my stamp in between each stamping so I don't get any contamination of colour, and I'm just using baby wipe for this, and I'm holding my card in place with a magnet just on the side there. You'll notice for some of the stamping I'll repeat stamp, I'll stamp it down once and then I'll re-ink and stamp it again to get a slightly darker colour. I'm going to work my way all across this card. I won't bore you with all of the stamping, I just wanted to make sure that you could see and understand the technique, and then I'll skip through to the end. And what I'll end up with is a rainbow pattern of stamping that works up the card. You can see as I've moved the card down it is hanging over the edge of my Misti stamping tool. That's perfectly fine, it won't leave a dent in your card and it won't bend the paper in any way. So you can see the sentiment I used is Happy Birthday, and I stamped that all up the centre of the card, and then I'm just applying some Tombow Mono multi glue onto the back of my parrot and just placing them down over the top. And that's a really quick and easy happy birthday card. I'm taking some of the sequins that are included in the kit, and I'm just using those around the white edges just to add a little bit more interest and some sparkle to the card. I think anyone would be happy to receive such a bright, colourful birthday card, and I love that sentiment, happy birthday. Okay, moving on to card number 2. As I mentioned, I've done the majority of my colouring outside of the video, otherwise I think we'd be here all day, and I've also done most of my die cutting. You can see here with the swing, it actually cuts the inside part of that swing so you can perfectly nestle one of your birds inside. I just think it looks so sweet with this little guy perched on top. For this one I wanted to make the swing element move. I wanted to make it into an actual swing, so I'm just taking a tiny hole punch, and I'm just punching the hole through the top of the ring of the swing at the top there. I hope that makes sense, and then I'll add some twine through the centre. I have a white card base and then some of the yellow card from the card kit. And you'll notice throughout this kit that the majority of my card bases, in fact I think all of my card bases are white. I did pull in some extra white cardstock from my stash, and all of my colouring is done with the Copic friendly cardstock that's included in the kit. Here I'm using the Birds of a Feather Stick Together sentiment, and I'm just stamping that down twice to get a really nice dark black sentiment. My little bird isn't yet stuck down, I just had him in place so I could visualise where I wanted my stamping to be, and now I'm going to add some interest to the background. I'm using the 3 feather stamps for this, and I'm using my VersaFine Inkpad and just stamping those repeatedly across the background. And you'll see here that I've just will rotate the stamp, and I'll just nestle all of the stamping together. It took me a while to stamp that first one down, but then you'll see once you get going, it's really quick and easy to make a custom background. And I think this would make a really nice colouring sheet to just repeat stamp these images, maybe have some of the larger birds as well. And you'll notice here that even though I'm stamping with VersaMark, which is a clear sticky ink that's usually used for heat embossing, it also leaves a watermark effect on the card. Some of my watermarks are a little bit dark. That's completely my fault because I didn't clean my stamp properly. Now I've added the twine to my bird swing, I'm just adding a tiny, barely noticeable notch in the top of that cardstock that I can nestle the string into, and that will help it stay in place at the top, and then it will also be able to move. Here I have my ATG gun, and this is just a really large tape dispenser, so you can apply double-sided sticky tape quick and easily to the backs of your cards, and it makes it really easy to work with your glue. There's no peeling off of release tapes, and it's one of my preferred methods of glue. I made sure that I had some of that glue behind where the string was, and that's what I'm using to hold the string in place. I'll then layer this on top of my card. All of my cards are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, which is a standard A2 size. If you take any of the cardstock that's included in the kit, the full size sheets of cardstock, cut them in half and fold them in half, this is the size that you'll get. And there we have card number 2. For card number 3, I had to use this stencil, so I have you sped up here, and I'm using the finger dauber that's included in the kit, as well as the distress ink and the stencil, and I'm again holding that down in place with my Heffy tape. I bought the Heffy tape as an extra. You don't get a roll in the kit, but I think it's really useful and definitely worth a look. It's a really low-tack tape that you can use to hold things like stencils in place, but you can also hold your dies in place as you run them through your die cut machine. So once I've peeled that away, I have my little birdie, and I also have one of the Holtz speech bubbles over there on the right hand side. I actually managed to lose this as I was working through this card, so you'll see that that disappears. I think it actually stuck to the bottom of my Misti as I was stamping. So here I have my anti-static powder tool and a black strip of cardstock. That's the black from the kit. And then I'm inking that up with VersaMark, and I'm going to use some of my white embossing powder from my stash just to heat emboss that sentiment. I think it's a really nice way to have a bright white sentiment on a black strip of cardstock, and it really makes it pop off a colourful background like this one. So now I'm going to heat set that using a heat tool, and you'll notice that the white powder kind of melts and becomes glossy and shiny. Next up, I'll add some foam tape to the back of this piece. I'll just trim it down so I have an idea of where I want to place it, and then add some Scotch foam tape to the back, peel off the release and stick that down. I think adding some dimension like this is a really great way to add interest to an otherwise quite plain and simple card, and I think the black and white really make the colours of my bird and the stenciled background pop. So I'm just using my scissors to trim off any of that excess, and then I'll go ahead and add foam tape to the bird as well. And I've left just a little bit around his feet and the end of his tail without foam tape because I'll stick that down on top of the black cardstock, and that already has dimension, so I wanted to make sure that everything was nice and even and flat when I stuck it down. So here's where I would have added the red heart, but I'd managed to misplace it, and I'm quite happy with how this looks anyway, so I didn't add that back in when I finished. Onto the next card, I used an embossing folder from my stash. This is very similar to a card that Leslie made in her Come Craft With Me live on a Friday night, only she made this manually without using an embossing folder. So you can definitely create this look without the embossing folder, just using some score lines on your cardstock to create the diamond pattern. Now I have a strip of the patterned paper that's included in the kit. You get some double-sided 6x6 sheets, and I just trimmed those down, and I've actually got quite a lot left. You'll see that I used it on many of the cards, but I do still have some of this left, so I can certainly make some more cards. Now I'm just applying that to one side. You'll notice that I use the grid lines on my mat to help me get perfect placement when I add strips such as this. I tend to line the card up so it's nice and straight, and then use either the vertical or horizontal lines to help me with my placement. Next I wanted to add some additional colour to this background piece, and I'm going to use the Enamel Accents by Ranger in the Lemon Twist colour. Again, you get the full size bottle in the kit, and these are just great for adding those little dots on the card. You'll notice that I use a scrap piece of cardstock just to the side, and I use that just to get everything going in case there's a small air bubble trapped inside the bottle, and then when I'm finished I just wipe it clean with a tissue. I'm applying some more tape onto a card base, and then I'll lay this panel on top to stick it down. And then I'll finish it off with another one of my little parrot birds, and this time I'll use the bird stand. So I'm being careful not to press any of those dots, those enamel accents, because they will stay wet for quite some time. So you'll notice I'm being quite careful as I work around this because I don't want to smudge them. I've definitely had that happen on more than one occasion. I'm not entirely sure of the drying time on these. I tend to leave them for as long as possible to make sure I don't have a disaster. Again, for these two pieces, I'm applying some foam dots this time, some foam squares, and I'm just applying them where it will hang over the already raised edge. And then that way it can lie flush. I'll use Tombow glue on the parts that will sit on the already raised area, so that cardstock strip, and then peel off the backing of those foam squares. I love the colouring on this particular bird, and you'll see I've used it on a couple of them. This kind of yellowish colour into pink, I think it's beautiful. So on to the next card. For this one, I again have a strip of patterned paper, and I'm applying double-sided sticky tape, and I'll stick that down onto a yellow card base. I really like these two shades of yellow together, and I love those stars. Just to highlight where those two pieces of paper join, I really like to add a peel-off sticker or a thin strip of cardstock, and this is a thin strip of the black cardstock that I just trimmed down using my paper trimmer and applied some glue onto the back using a glue pen, and then I'll trim off the excess. And you'll see how that really kind of makes a feature out of those two pieces and defines that edge where they join. So here I have the coordinating die for the bird. I've already cut him out, but I actually want to put this on the inside of my card. So I'm using some tape to hold him in place, and then I have some removable adhesive, and I'm just using this to help me hold this piece onto my card base. You could go ahead and glue it straight down, but I wanted to make sure that it cut perfectly and I didn't have to go back in and rerun the die through just the card base, so I just held that in place temporarily, and I'll make sure to run that through my die cut machine with the card open. So I peeled it up and it cut perfectly through both of those layers, so now I can peel that top layer off and just rub away any of that removable adhesive and then reattach using permanent adhesive. As I say, you could skip this step by sticking it down straight to the card and straight away, but not only did I want to make sure everything cut perfectly, I wanted to add more foam tape. I really do enjoy having that dimension on a card, and it's not so thick that you can't use an envelope and send this through the post. So I think the way those line up perfectly is just beautiful. To have that kind of added dimension and then to be able to stick this piece on the inside, I think is a really nice way to kind of level up your cards and give it that something extra. So I'm going to add some more glue onto the back, and you'll notice that I smoothed the glue out with my finger this time. With it being on the inside of the card, I really wanted to make sure that none of this glue kind of seeped out of the sides and then stuck my card closed for all eternity, because that would be a disaster. So I was really careful to make sure that I didn't have any excess glue, and then I just puzzle piece him back inside the card, and you can see that as you lift it up, he's on the inside. To coordinate with this kind of inside-outside theme, I decided to add part of my sentiment on the outside of the card and part on the inside. So first I'll stamp along that black line, and again just using my stamping tool because it does make things a little bit easier, certainly because I've got that foam tape behind this piece. I wasn't sure if it was going to stamp perfectly. So I've added birds of a feather, and then I used a black marker to add 3 little dots at the end of this piece to kind of indicate that the sentiment continues on the inside. For the inside sentiment, we have stick together. So the full sentiment will read, birds of a feather, stick together. I think the sentiments included in this set are really sweet, and I like the way that you can build them up together so you can mix and match exactly what they say. So I'll just give you a quick view of how it looks together, and at that point the heart turned back up, and you'll see I just kind of swiped him out the way. I think he was definitely stuck to the bottom of my stamp tool. Okay, so for this one I have a piece of the diagonal striped cardstock, and I just cut a corner of the patterned paper, and I think it looks really nice with those diagonal stripes just popped into the corner, and then I'm running a thin line of adhesive along that edge to again just highlight with a black strip, and you can see it really kind of levels that up. I think I've used that phrase already in this video, but it kind of brings something extra to it other than one piece of paper stuck on top of another, and I really think it finishes it off. Once I'm happy with how that looks, I'll go ahead and add my sentiment, and again I'm just using the angle of the stripe to highlight where I put my sentiment, and I'm making sure I'm happy with the placement of my bird. I'll again just stamp that down. For all of my sentiment stamping, I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is my favourite sentiment ink. It's really nice and dark and black, and I'll make sure to have links to as many possible products as I can find in the description below. So for this one, I'm doing something kind of special. You get these action wobbles or action wobblers in the kit, and they are small pieces of plastic with clear film on each side, and you peel off the backing and stick it to your die cut image or whatever it is that you want to make wobble, in this case my bird, and then you stick the other side to your card, and then when you kind of flick the side of it, look at that wobble. Is that not just the cutest? So it works perfectly with the sentiment shake your tail feathers. And here you'll see it squishes down really well, so you can still fit this in an envelope and send it through the post with no problem. Okay, so for this card I wanted to create a custom background again, and I'm starting somewhat central on the card, and I'm just repeat stamping this little birdie, and I'm using a light coloured ink from Size-Versamark stamp, just so it's not too overwhelming in the background, but you can clearly see those images. And I just worked my way around, making sure to stamp off the edges of the cardstock so it looks a little bit more like a patterned piece of paper that's been cut down. I actually end up covering up quite a lot of this with these black strips, and again, you guessed it, I'm using more foam tape. I love dimension on a card. So I'll peel away the backing and then stick that down, one on the left hand side and one on the right, right up against the edge of the card. And then on top of that I'm going to add a pop of colour using the aqua coloured cardstock. And I've cut down some thin strips that I've just eyeballed to be roughly the same width, and then I'll stick those down with some glue, so those are flat on top of the dimension. I felt like one layer of dimension was enough for this. As much as I love it, I didn't want to pop everything up too much. I'm just using a pair of tweezers to help me pick this up because it is sticky, and I don't want to get my fingers all covered in glue at this point because I will no doubt transfer it onto my cards. So I line that up somewhat centrally inside those strips. I definitely eyeball a lot of what I do. I mean, handmade cards are not supposed to be hallmark. They do sometimes have flaws or uniquenesses, as I'd rather call them, and I think that's okay. If you're sending a custom card to somebody, you've taken the time to create it, I think they're going to be pleased with what you give them. So here I've used a blue birdie and he is on a blue swing, and I also used foam tape to stick those down as well. Here I've added another sentiment, and this is "Thank you for always standing by me." And again, this is one of the custom sentiments. I believe there is also "Thanks for always being my wingman," hence the Wingman card kit. So on to the next card. I've completely lost count of where we're up to, but hopefully you're still enjoying yourself. Do make sure to let me know in the comments section which one of these cards is your favourite, and if you do recreate one of them, be sure to tag me on Instagram. So here I've applied a strip of that patterned paper, or coloured cardstock rather, and now I have a strip of the patterned paper that has the happy birthday sentiment, and I've just trimmed one of those out so I have this thin happy birthday strip. I really love this card. I think it's really kind of bright and fun and silly and perfect for a birthday. So I've taken 3 of the same image and coloured it in different ways. So we have a yellow, a red and a blue. As mentioned, I'm certainly no colouring expert. I will make sure to link to a couple of people that I think are in the description section below. I've added foam tape onto the back of my yellow and then also my blue birdie. And then I'm going to use an action wobbler again, or an action wobbler. It's one of the two. I've applied one of those little plastic springies on the back of this red bird in the middle so he can wobble around on this cardstock. So I'll go ahead and peel off the backing. I like to kind of test it before I use it. I'm not 100% sure whether you're supposed to put the thicker plastic part on your image or on your card base. I tend to put it on my card base. I feel like it wobbles a little bit better that way, but you can certainly have a test before you stick anything down and see which you prefer. Of course, you can't stick them down without testing it because it's so much fun. I think I actually edited out quite a significant amount of time of me playing with this before I went ahead and stamped the sentiment. And then again, use the shake your tail feathers. I trimmed off the excess of that red sentiment strip, and then this card is all finished. So for this one, I'm using a full-size piece of my patterned paper, and this is the opposite side to the orange stripes that I used earlier. All of these pieces are double-sided, and you get one of each so you can use both. This one has a subtle kind of swirly background pattern, and I've applied that all over my 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch card base. And then I have some more foam tape, it is my favourite, and I'm peeling off the backing and applying a strip of yellow cardstock. I decided with this kit not to use the cardstock for my card bases. You certainly could if you prefer, but I wanted to stretch it a little bit further and get a little bit more bang for my buck, so I decided to use white card bases from my stash. Again, I'm going to highlight these pieces with this black strip just by applying some glue along the edges and then just adding some black cardstock. Again, it's the cardstock that came in the kit. All of the cardstock and pattern paper that I used, apart from a couple of extra sheets of white cardstock, came in this kit. And if you haven't already seen it, I will have a link to my unboxing as well. I'll trim off the excess, and then I'm going to add an image into the centre. Again, I'm using this little bird stand, I think it's really sweet, and I'll stick that down and then add my little birdie on top. Because I've already got a layer of dimension, I decided to stick this down flat, and you'll see this little bird is so sweet. I think he looks like he's taking a nap, which I can relate to. Again, I'll stamp my sentiment, and I'm using 2 of them built together, so we have "Thanks for always being my wingman." I double stamped that to make sure it was really nice and crisp, and then this is the final card. I recognise this guy, he I think is my favourite. I coloured and die cut a whole bunch of the feather images, and I'm just laying those down on the card so they kind of explode out around him, and I just took the time to place them before adding any glue so I could make sure I didn't make any mistakes and I was happy with how everything looked and that I had enough of them before I got going. And then I'm using a jewel pickup stick. This is a stick with kind of a sticky end, so you can press it down into a sequin or a jewel or a die cut image like I'm doing here, and then add some glue underneath and then press it into the glue and it will hold in place. So I've skipped ahead and you can see I've really filled up this card base. I again made sure that I had some of the images hanging off the edge of the cardstock because I think it gives a slightly better look, and I tried to make sure that I didn't have the same colours too close to each other. You can see I've fussed around a little bit here with this last colour, or this last feather, and then placed him down, and then I just need to add a sentiment. Again, I'm going back to using a black cardstock strip. It's difficult to say, black cardstock strip with some white heat embossing on top. So I use my anti-static powder tool that removes any static cling or oils from the cardstock so that when you pour on your embossing powder, it only sticks to the VersaFine ink and you don't get a big blob of a fingerprint or static cling all around your sentiment. I'll use my heat tool to heat set it, and I love watching embossing powder melt. I think that is probably one of the first things that really got me into card making. My auntie actually showed me melting some gold embossing powder, and I was just kind of blown away. I couldn't believe how it changed from this kind of nice kind of gold powder to this unbelievably shiny, metallic beautifulness, and it was so easy to do. So I think that was one of the things that kind of got me hooked. So I'll stick that down kind of across the centre of the card-ish, trying to make sure that I centre up the sentiment part, and then I'll just go ahead and trim off the excess, and if I didn't already mention one final time, I used some foam tape for this. And then I'll trim off all those extra little feathers and trim away the extra of the black cardstock, and that will be my final card finished. As I say, I think this one is my favourite. I just really like the kind of beautiful bright colours along it. So now I'll do a quick recap and take you back through all 10 cards. First off, we had the Happy Birthday sentiment stamping, where I stamped repeatedly using different colours of ink and put an image on top. Then we used the stencil and a black cardstock strip with a sentiment. Then I used an action wobbler to create some movement on the card, and then I created a bird on a swing which also has a little bit of movement using the twine from the kit. Next up we have the kind of dots all over the background, so we had some embossing and then the enamel accents, which I think just look really beautiful. Then we have another yellow card. This time it's the inside out card, where the image is on the inside and some of the stamping is on the outside. Then we have this blue one with the bird on the swing. This time there's no movement. Then we've got these 3 musketeers, and the centre one has got one of those action wobblers again. Then we have this little sleepy guy on his perch, which I think is so very sweet. And finally we have this whole colour burst of feathers. So thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed this video and you're feeling inspired to use your kit. If you do recreate one of these, be sure to tag me on Instagram at crafty.shifty. On screen right now are a couple more videos that I think you might enjoy. If you haven't already watched them, go ahead and click on the thumbnail and that will take you straight through to the video. That's all from me today. Bye for now.